Hey everyone, I'm excited to kick off Season 2 of Microsoft Research Forum. It's great to be back and share the discoveries and ideas that keep pushing the boundaries of what AI can do. I'm Maya Murad, a Senior Technical PM at Microsoft Research AI Frontiers, based in our NYC lab, where I get to work on the future of agentic AI. Part of my job is helping shape the research we invest in, choosing the challenges that matter most, and making sure those breakthroughs turn into real-world impact for people and organizations everywhere. At Microsoft Research, we have the opportunity to pursue ambitious research ideas, take risks, and deliver impact at scale. Today's episode is packed with talks that are bold in both ambition and reach. We've got friends joining us from around the globe: Mozan in Redmond, Kwanjun in New England, Paolo in Cambridge, Frank in Berlin, and finally Alexandra and Sulin in Montreal. It's an exciting lineup that reflects what we do best here at Microsoft Research, driving multidisciplinary, high-impact work that is open to the world. And with that, let's dive in. Mojan is a senior researcher and fellow labmate from AI Frontiers based in Redmond. Mojan has been at the heart of developing the Phi suite of small language models, which have made a real splash in the open source community for their balance of efficiency and capability. Today, she'll walk us through the latest milestone, the Phi 4 reasoning model suite, which are trained to reason step-by-step through complex math, science, and coding problems. It's a great example of how efficient language models can punch above their weight. And because they're lightweight, they can even run locally on your own laptop or phone. That makes advanced reasoning more efficient and accessible to a broader set of use cases. Over to you, Mojan.
Hi everyone, my name is Mojan and I'm a researcher at Microsoft Research AI Frontiers Lab, where we have been working on several generations of small language models and pushing the frontier of what is possible. Today, I wanted to talk to you about how we are teaching reasoning to small language models and specifically our recently released model, Phi 4 reasoning. This has been a collaboration with an amazing team at MSR. Before going into the details, I wanted to give a quick overview of reasoning models and their core characteristics. These models follow explicit logical steps in order to solve problems, much like how humans think. And they work by iterative refinement, meaning that they backtrack and double-check that their answers are correct in order to make sure that there was no mistake. And their biggest difference with generic models is that they create a thinking trace, much like a scratchpad, that clearly explains all of the analysis and trial and error that the model is making for solving the problem. And this is especially helpful when we want to understand how the model arrived at a particular solution and also verify the outcome. Because of these properties, the reasoning models are a natural fit for solving complex problems. These include strategic planning and multi-step solutions in agentic applications. And they're also very good at algorithmic thinking, for example, for coding or solving scientific problems as a tutor. And they're suitable for logical analysis and evaluating complex arguments like in constraint satisfaction. Now let's take a look at the Phi 4 reasoning models. Late last year, we released the Phi 4 non-reasoning, which is a 14 billion parameter transformer, and all of our reasoning models are built on top of this base through a specific post-training process. There are two models in the reasoning family. Phi 4 reasoning is fine-tuned on more than 1.4 million STEM and coding questions. And Phi 4 reasoning plus is a further enhanced version that has a short reinforcement learning stage. What is really special about Phi 4 reasoning is that they're competing in terms of task performance with models that are 5 to 50 times larger their size. And at 14 billion parameters, they can efficiently run on commodity hardware like laptops. And we did a comprehensive evaluation of Phi 4 reasoning on various domains like math, scientific reasoning, coding, problem solving, planning, and spatial understanding. And we found it to be better across the board compared to Llama 70B distilled with DeepSeek R1 and O1 Mini, while outperforming the original DeepSeek R1, Claude 3.7 Sonnet, and Gemini 2 thinking on most of the tasks. And we find reasoning to be a transferable meta skill, meaning that we are seeing improvements compared to the base non-reasoning model even on the domains that we haven't trained for. And in order to maximize the performance of our models, we have three fundamental pillars and steps in our design. The first step is data curation, and it starts by collecting and filtering high volumes of data. And here we are really focused on 4 different strategies. The first one is that the prompts should be teachable, so they're selected to have optimal complexity and diversity to teach the most content to the model. And the prompts are selected to be at the edge of the base model capability in order to boost the performance to the max. And we also have a high bar for quality control, which is why we heavily filter all of our data. And lastly, we make sure that we cover a lot of the domains that we want the model to be good at, such as STEM, coding, and also safety-focused tasks. Once we've gathered our prompts and questions, we generate detailed reasoning chain of thoughts using O3 Mini as a teacher model, and these high-quality step-by-step demonstrations are shown to the model during training to achieve similar problem-solving capabilities. And we also focus on data mixture and do a strategic combination of different data domains and difficulty levels to make sure that the model knows how to solve different problem types. Once the data is ready, we perform supervised fine-tuning, where we had a multi-stage experimental process. The first stage is exploration, where we're establishing the training recipe, and we focus on doing a lot of ablations and experiments on single domain data sources, and we tune our training hyperparameters and the general training algorithm. We had a couple of key insights during this exploration stage. The first one is that synthetic data improves the final answer quality a lot, and we find it to be very helpful, as we've outlined in the technical report. We also noticed that the reasoning-specific system message boosts the consistency and performance of the model, and that is why we encourage everyone to use the system prompt that the model was trained with. We also noticed that as the model becomes better and the quality improves, the response length decreases as the thinking process becomes more efficient and coherent. And last but not least, we noticed that there is an additive property across different domains where we can individually optimize the data sources within one domain and then confidently combine all of the domains together in one final run. And that brings us to the second stage of our experiments, which is the scaling up of both training and inference. So here we combine all of the data from all of these different domains that we've gathered and we've optimized previously in a long training run. And we also use a better teacher model and allow an inference time scaling for the teacher to generate longer responses. So this long context allows our model to spend more time thinking to solve more complex problems. The final stage of our training is a short reinforcement learning using outcome-based rewards, which allow the model to learn from its own success and failure patterns. And we select a subset of math problems in order to conduct this reinforcement learning over. And what we observed is that reinforcement learning actually allows the model to generate on average 1.5 times longer responses, which contain more detailed step-by-step solutions. So this gives us a trade-off between accuracy and efficiency, where the reinforcement learning checkpoint provides higher accuracy at the cost of increased tokens. And we've been seeing good adoption by the community for our models due to their competitive performance across domains and their small footprint. So the community also appreciated the clear chain of thought that the model generates and the visibility of the multi-step planning. We've also been seeing great contributions by the community for various quantized versions of our model that further push the efficiency. And we really emphasize on the value of open weight, which not only allows for free and accessible inference, but also allows others to build on top of our models and our technology to push the frontier even further. I would like to thank all of you for tuning into this talk, and here are some more resources if you're interested to learn more about our project and start using the models.
Thank you, Mojan. It's exciting to see how a carefully trained small model can demonstrate real reasoning power. Try the model for yourself. It's always great seeing what the open source community does with Phi. Even the best models are limited by how we train them at scale. Training today's state-of-the-art systems can take millions of GPU hours, and once workloads are spread across many machines, a major bottleneck emerges: communication. At every step, GPUs must exchange and combine their updates, and that synchronization can be both slow and costly. That's where Dion comes in. Let's hear from my fellow AI Frontiers colleague, Kwon-jun, joining us from the New England lab to share how this next-gen optimizer makes training faster and more scalable. Let's dive in.
Hi everyone, my name is Kwon-jun. I'm a senior researcher in Microsoft Research AI Frontiers. Today we'll talk to you about our new optimizer, Dion. As we all know, training state-of-the-art AI models require millions of GPU hours. So it is really important that we come up with good optimizer for training AI models. For the longest time, we have been using Adam or weight decay variant Adam W for training our favorite AI models. But here the question is Adam the end of history? Recently, there has been orthogonal updates revolution. For example, mu1, which has shown to lead to faster convergence under a factor of 2 and leading to stable training as well as being big batch friendly. And a lot of excitements are going on around orthogonal updates, especially after 2 production level models release, such as Kimi K2 model and GLM 4.5. So let's pause for a bit and talk about what orthogonal updates are. In order to explain orthogonal updates, let's first review standard SGD. Standard SGD will take the current parameter, say xt-1, and update along the negative direction of gradient, say GT, gradient matrix GT, with the learning rate eta to obtain next set of weights, xt. In contrast to standard SGD, orthogonal updates do the following. We first take the GT matrix and singular value decompose into U sigma V transpose, and only take U V transpose as a update direction for this optimizer.step. At this point, people might wonder, isn't singular value decomposition too expensive for each step of optimizer? In fact, the popular mu1 algorithm implements this orthogonalization via iterative matrix multiplications called Dion-Schultz iteration. So theoretical justification behind orthogonal updates is as follows. If you think of matrix parameter M as a vector transformer that takes the input activation A into output activation B, by having the update of optimizer to be orthonormal, it ensures that whatever input activation comes in, it will be transformed by equal amount. This underlying principle surprisingly leads to very effective practice where it leads to faster convergence and stable training, etc. So then is mu1 the end of history? It turns out mu1 hits a wall when trying to scale up to bigger than 100 billion parameter models, especially dense model. It turns out that underlying procedure of mu1 step, as I described, the matrix iteration, matrix multiplication iteration, called Dion-Schultz iteration, needs dense matrix multiplication on full matrices, which clashes with sharded weights, common for distributed training, and also needing for full matrices require heavy cross-shard communication collectives or redundant computation. This is where Dion comes in. Dion is basically more distributed training friendly orthogonal update. The core question we would like to answer in this project is, can we design orthogonal updates without full matrix materialization, which is more friendly with sharded weights, hence leading to better scalability? Dion precisely answers this question by designing orthogonal updates that's more distributed training friendly. First of all, being orthogonal updates, Dion preserves all the mu1's benefits that I mentioned. For example, faster convergence, stable training, etc. But we implement this orthogonal updates by rethinking linear algebra. Instead of employing Dion-Schultz iteration, which requires dense full matrix multiply, we use this amortized power iteration, which is more compatible with distributed sharded weight training. Crucially, while doing that, we introduce new scalability lever in the form of low rank fraction factor, and we'll talk about this in a bit. First, let me show nice features of Dion. As I said, it enhances scalability of orthonormal updates. With low rank factor, we'll shortly talk about, Dion update rule scales much better with less communication across scale. So here we're showing micro benchmark results. On the left-hand side, we're showing square matrix benchmark where we're measuring time per each optimizer step across different optimizers, Mu1, Dion with 4th rank fraction, Dion with 16th rank fraction. And as you can see, as matrix size becomes larger, Dion with low rank fraction becomes a lot more favorable in terms of time per step. On the right-hand side, we're showing specific case of Llama 3 405 billion dense model training configuration and benchmarking each optimizer's step, time per step. And as you can see, Dion becomes a lot more tractable than Mu1 for this specific setting. And again, as I said, Dion is more compatible with sharded weight training, in particular in our paper and also in our open source code base. You can find efficient implementation of Dion for both one-way and two-way sharding. Another interesting thing about Dion is because we're using amortized power iteration, it leads to a lot more algorithmic flexibility. For example, in our paper, there's a lazy Dion variant, which leads to further speed up. So let me talk about low rankness or low rank factor, a new scalability lever that we introduced in this Dion update rule. So low rank factor basically controls the rank of each update, making the update cheaper to compute and less things to communicate across device, leading to big speedups. Crucially, we make this work by introducing error feedback mechanism, which maintains update quality at lower ranks. Another interesting thing about Dion is that across scale, it seems that we can get away with low rankness. So here we're showing a result, our empirical study, scaling study, where we increase the model size. And as we increase the model size, we saw that the gap between higher ranked Dion and low ranked Dion becomes narrower and narrower, showing at larger scale, you can get away with smaller rank fraction. Also, we add power SGD style compressed data parallel sync mechanism, which allows for even less communication, which could be very beneficial in hybrid sharding strategy. So let me summarize what Dion is about. Dion, again, is orthonormalized update for large models. It's more scalable for larger models. In particular, as you saw in the benchmark result, Dion is feasible even at Llama 3 405B dense model setting. Crucially, we introduce low rankness or low rank factor, new scalability access, scalability lever that leads to better compute and communication in optimizer step. Another nice thing about Dion is that it's fully compatible with weight sharding strategies. As I highlight, it leads to great algorithmic flexibility. For example, in the paper, you can find lazy Dion variants and effective rank variant. We fully open sourced our both one-way sharding and two-way sharding implementation of Dion in the following GitHub link. As a final remark, optimizer is used everywhere to train AI models. So it is important that we adopt this orthonormal updates revolution to save flops and do efficient model training. I would like to also thank our collaborators, both from AI Frontiers and our interns. And I'd like to thank Microsoft Research for letting us open source this project. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Kwon-jun. That was awesome. I learned a lot. It's exciting to see how the right optimizer can cut through one of the biggest training bottlenecks and make large-scale learning more efficient. Once we've streamlined the math of training, another bottleneck quickly emerges: the hardware itself. Today's data centers are constrained by how machines communicate. Copper links are power efficient, but can only reach a couple of meters, while optical links extend farther, but burn far more power and are less reliable. That trade-off limits how we design and scale AI clusters. To explore a new path forward, let's hop across the ocean to our Cambridge lab, where Paolo, a senior principal research manager, is rethinking data center hardware with some very cool micro-LEDs. This breakthrough has the potential to rethink AI data center design and open the door to new possibilities in scaling.
Hi, I'm Paolo Costa from Microsoft Research in Cambridge in the UK. And today I would like to talk to you about how we can reimagine the next generation infrastructure using MicroLEDs. So the trend where we're seeing across many generations of AI accelerators is that while the compute has been able to scale at a reasonable pace, the network and the memory have been lagging behind. And indeed what we are seeing is that AI workloads, especially inference ones, are becoming I/O bound. What it means is that we cannot fully utilize our GPUs because they are bottlenecked on either the memory or the network or both. One of the key reasons for this trend is that today's communication technologies force you to make a tough choice. On the one hand, you can use optical communication with lasers. You can have very long reach, like tens, 100 meters and beyond, but the cost and power is very high. And also reliability is very low. And so whenever you can, you're forced to use copper cables, where are very low cost, extremely low power, and highly reliable, but the reach is very short. In fact, it's less than 2 meters for GPU to GPU, and only a few millimeters for GPU to memory. And this is actually creating a number of challenges for system designers. For example, recently NVIDIA introduces the latest Blackwell rack, where you have 72 GPUs just inside one rack. This is 120 kilowatt per rack, or the equivalent of 60 dishwashers. And projections for future generation is to go beyond 0.5 megawatt per rack. And the only reason you have to put so many GPUs inside a single rack is because you're forced to use copper for their high bandwidth connectivity, multiple terabits per GPU. But as you can imagine, this is becoming extremely challenging from a cooling, thermal, and mechanical standpoint. And ultimately, this is limit the number of GPUs that you can interconnect at high bandwidth. Similarly, for the memory, since we can have only put the memory next to the GPUs, there is only so much real estate that you can use. And so again, this is constraining the amount of memory that you can make available to each GPU. So why is optics so high cost and high power? The reason is because today we use lasers that are extremely expensive, they are very high power hungry, and so in order to amortize their cost and power, we have to transmit faster and faster. We used to do 25 gigabit and 50 gigabit, and now we do 100 gigabit per channel. Next generation is going to be 200 gigabit per channel. So for example, today in one transceiver we have 8 lasers, each one transmitting 100 gigabit. However, as we go up in speed, you need more and more complex electronics to compensate for transmission impairments. And this also adds up to the power and also the cost, because you have to use the latest CMOS processing node technology like 5 nanometer or 3 nanometer in the next generation. Also, since lasers operate in the infrared region of the space, you cannot use silicon photodetector, you have to use more complex materials like silicon germanium or gallium arsenide. And this is where the high power and high cost comes to the picture. And also, when you operate at such high speed, margins become smaller and smaller, and this also ultimately leads to higher failure rate. So, in our approach, we decide to go to the completely opposite direction. Rather than having a few channels operating at very high speed, we adopt a wide and slow architecture, which means having many channels, each one operating at very low speed. So, for example, to get to the 800 gigabit, rather than having 8 channels at 100 gigabit, we can have 400 channels, each one operating at 2 gigabit. The advantage is that now, since we operate at very low speed, the electronics become much more efficient. We don't need to use advanced signal processing. We can do anything in the analog domain, and we can also relax the requirement in terms of process node size. Now, we can't use lasers because this would just break the bank. So instead we use MicroLEDs. MicroLEDs are very similar to the LEDs, for example, that we have in this room, but are much smaller, like 5-10 micron size. And this is a technology that is being developed for next generation displays, like smartwatches or head-mounted devices. And they provide three advantages. The first one is that they're extremely cost-effective. Second, they can operate at very, very low power. And also they're very small, and so what it means is that you can pack many of them inside a single space. Also, they operate in the visible range, like green, blue, red. Why is this important? Because now on the receiving side, we can just use a standard camera sensor detector like the one that we have in our phone. And so when you combine all of this together, what you're seeing is that we can get very low cost and very low power. Also, since we can put many of them in a very small space and they're very low power and cost effective, it's easy to over-provision them, which also makes them much more reliable. Now, I make it sound like very simple, but actually realizing this vision in practice requires a lot of innovation across the stack, and also require a very multidisciplinary team with expertise across many fields, from integrated photonics, material science, lens design, and digital and analog design. So one of the first challenges we had to solve is how to make these MicroLEDs that are designed for very slow rate to operate them very, very fast. But also, we have to look across the stack. For example, we design new type of optics that allow to better couple the light into the fiber. Also, we don't use standard fiber, we use imaging fibers with thousands of cores. This is a fiber typically used for medical applications, like endoscopy, and instead we use that for communication. And also we've been looking at beyond the single module, for example, looking at designing new connectors and optical circuit switch that are compatible with these new technologies. Now, we really have great support both from Microsoft Research and from the Azure team. And together with our supplier, we were able actually to demonstrate that it's possible to build a technology that breaks this trade-off. So we can have at the same time low power, low cost, and high reliability, while still having a reach of up to 50 meters. And one of the strengths of this technology is that it's fully compatible with today's form factor. And so what it means is that it doesn't require any changes to existing switches or NICs and can be immediately deployed. Also, since operated at the physical layer, it's completely agnostic to the protocol. So you can use it for Ethernet, CXL, PCI, and so on. This is already a big win because it can address today's pain point. But what makes me excited is the fact that it can also open up new exciting opportunities as we think of the next generation infrastructure. For example, on the networking front, since now we are not constrained by the short distance of copper cables, we can now expand the high bandwidth domain to multiple racks. And also we can use more flexible topologies, for example, using optical circuit switch, which will improve our efficiency and overall utilization. Also on the memory front, we are not constrained to put the memory next to the GPU, but we can now disaggregate the memory, but removing the memory off the package, which would allow to increase the memory bandwidth and capacity that is available to a GPU, but also make it possible to explore novel type of memory that are different from the one that we use today. And finally, and this is really our North Star, would be the idea actually to put the microLED directly on top of the GPU, because this can unlock the full aerial bandwidth. Now, this would require a lot more innovation happening at the packaging side and thermal and microLED devices. But if we can get there, this can really be a game changer, because this can enable to have multiple of petabits of bandwidth coming out from the GPU. And so what we really would like to do is to engage with the broader research and the industry community to work together, understanding how we can best leverage this property and design together the next generation AI infrastructure. So thanks so much for your time, and looking forward to connect to all of you.
That was great, Paolo. I now know everything I need to know about micro-LEDs. It's exciting to see how rethinking hardware at the link level could change the way we design data centers for AI. Let's switch gears now and move from the infrastructure that powers AI to the scientific breakthroughs AI itself can enable. One of the most exciting frontiers for AI is in science, where it's starting to accelerate discovery itself. Take proteins. Understanding how they move and change shape is essential for drug discovery. But traditionally, simulating those dynamics is a slow and incredibly compute-intensive process. To share a breakthrough in this space, we'll hear from Frank Noe, Partner Research Manager in Microsoft Research AI for Science, located in Berlin. Frank is here to share BioEmu, a biomolecular emulator that can model proteins with near-experimental accuracy at speeds 100,000 times faster than traditional simulation. Let's check it out.
Hello, my name is Frank Noe. I'm a Partner Research Manager at Microsoft Research AI for Science. And at AI for Science, we firmly believe that deep learning will lead to breakthroughs in scientific discovery in the next years. And therefore, we are developing deep learning models for the sciences to pursue this mission. Today, I'll introduce you to BioEmu, a biomolecular emulator, which is one of our recent models towards this goal. Our bodies are built up of tissues and cells, and on the size of a nanometer, that's a billionth of a meter, you'll find biomolecules, such as DNA and proteins. And these are really nanomachines that make life work. We characterize the study of proteins and other biomolecules in three aspects: sequence, structure, and function. The Human Genome Project gave us the ability to sequence the DNA. DNA has segments called genes, and each gene can be translated and transcribed into a chain of amino acids. This is a protein. Depending on the amino acid code, the protein will fold up into three-dimensional structures. But experimentally determining those 3D structures is very time-consuming and difficult. With the AlphaFold breakthrough, these protein structures can now be accurately predicted. So we have scalable ways to determine protein sequence and structure, but understanding how they work, understanding their function, that still remains a challenge. What is protein function and how does it relate to structure? Let's look at an example. This is actin, a protein that plays a key role in the formation of muscle fibers. Like most proteins, actin does not have a single structure. It can open and close. It prefers to be in the closed state when a small molecule called ATP is bound to it. Actins with ATP are shown in blue. When actin is closed, it also likes to bind to other actins and form filaments. These filaments are a building block of our muscles. In the filament, a reaction can be triggered that converts ATP into ADP. Actins with ADP are shown in green. Actins with ADP prefer to be open, so they like less to be bound and dissociate from the filament, where they can open. ADP can be exchanged with ATP, actin closes and binds again, the cycle repeats. This example shows that the biological function of proteins depends on their ability to change conformations and the fact that different conformations change the way proteins bind to other proteins. So these protein conformations and the transitions between them can be revealed with experimental measurements and with simulations, molecular dynamics simulations. But these techniques are very time-consuming and expensive. For example, this is a tiny protein simulated with molecular dynamics for 1/1,000,000th of a second, a microsecond. This simulation took 2 entire days on a modern GPU, and it shows very little motion. Only when simulating much longer, like milliseconds, you will see functionally relevant events such as this. This is protein unfolding. Also protein folding, binding, conformational changes. These are all rare events that take much longer to simulate. But this takes years of compute time, making this approach really unpractical to scale it to many proteins. At Microsoft Research AI for Science, we develop AI emulators. These are deep learning models that behave like simulators, but they are much, much faster. BioEmu is a biomolecular emulator. It's been trained with a huge set of high-quality data, including the AlphaFold database, which contains AlphaFold's structure predictions for over 100 million proteins, on a vast set of molecular dynamic simulations with 200 milliseconds length total, and on 500,000 experimental measurements of protein stabilities. At inference time, we query BioEmu with a protein sequence. BioEmu will then generate a large ensemble of protein structures from which various properties of the protein can be computed. And these property predictions are very cheap and fast compared to MD simulation or experiments. Therefore, BioEmu amortizes the upfront cost of generating its training data. We've tested BioEmu in 3 different ways. First of all, BioEmu predicts experimentally known conformational changes, such as this one. So this is a receptor domain, and you'll see an interpolation of BioEmu samples between 2 known experimental structures that are shown in gray. BioEmu predicts large-scale domain motions, such as this one, also local unfolding transitions, and the formation of hidden binding pockets, which are relevant for drug molecules, and does so with high probability. We've also asked the question if BioEmu can quantitatively emulate MD simulations, these very expensive simulations. So if you run simulations like this one for several GPU years, you can compute a statistic from it that is called an energy landscape. These energy landscapes are basically maps, and each point of the map corresponds to a set of similar protein structures. And the color will tell you how much probability is in each point, so how probable it is to find the protein at these structures. Now, BioEmu will sample these protein structures very quickly, and in less than 1 GPU hour, you can compute a very similar energy landscape. So it emulates molecular dynamic simulation, in this case 100,000 times faster. BioEmu also predicts protein stabilities. Protein stability is basically the probability to find the protein in its folded state versus its unfolded state. And this is something that can be experimentally quite well measured. So we can compare BioEmu's predictions with experiments, and we find that we can predict the folding stability with less than 1 kilocalorie per mole error. This is called experimental accuracy. And by analyzing the ensemble of structures that we are generating, we can also ask the question whether a particular change in the protein sequence, such as a mutation, leads to destabilization or stabilization, and why. Many experts agree that after the protein sequence and structure revolutions, understanding protein dynamics and function is the next frontier, and is key to understanding how biology works, how diseases work, and how to develop drugs to treat them. Also, many experts agree that current tools such as MD simulations or experiments are not scalable enough to get us there. BioEmu is one step in this direction. It helps us to understand how single proteins change their shape and how stable they are. And these are key aspects of protein functions. More work is needed to integrate how these protein dynamics interact with binding of other proteins and drug molecules, and how this leads then to biological function. We think this is really important work that can help us advance science and medicine, and we're very excited that Microsoft Research gives us the resources to be able to do it.
Impressive work, Frank. That's definitely a game changer for science. As we close today, let's return to another dimension of research that's just as important: theory and fundamentals. At Microsoft Research, alongside applied breakthroughs, we also invest deeply in the kinds of conceptual explorations that shape how AI is understood and used. These efforts are often less visible than new models or systems, but they're pursued with the same passion, and they lay the groundwork for long-term progress. From our Montreal lab, Alexandra and Sulin, researchers in the Fairness, Accountability, Transparency, and Ethics in AI group, FATE, are here to share a framework for dehumanizing machines. basically keeping AI transparent, trustworthy, and not misleadingly human. Super important work. Let's hear more directly from Alexandra and Sulin.
Hi there, I'm Alexandra Oltanu, a principal researcher on the Fairness, Accountability, Transparency and Ethics team at Microsoft Research Montreal.
And I'm Sulin Blodgett, a senior researcher also on the FATE team at Microsoft Research Montreal, and we're excited to share some of her recent work with you.
As responsible AI researchers at Microsoft Research, our work focuses on how to proactively and systematically anticipate social impacts arising from AI systems, as well as on developing conceptual clarity about the properties of AI systems and their possible adverse impacts necessary to guide both measurement and mitigation efforts. Most recently, we focused on questions around human agency with an emphasis on anthropomorphic AI system design and behavior.
Next, Alexandra will discuss why paying attention to anthropomorphic system design and behaviors is important.
Generative AI systems are the focus of growing scrutiny, in part because their outputs are increasingly anthropomorphic, or in other words, they are perceived to be human-like. To guide practitioners in making deliberate choices about how to appropriately design anthropomorphic AI systems, our research aims to equip them with clarity regarding what about these systems' design and behaviors makes them anthropomorphic, and to foster a greater recognition of the wider range of available and more appropriate design choices. Indeed, the outputs of many text generation systems are increasingly anthropomorphic, including because some outputs contain claims that the system has a past or a human-like life or life goals, that it can understand, empathize with, or care for others, or that it has an ability to reflect on or imagine how others may feel. Having systems generating text claiming to have feelings, beliefs, understanding, free will, or an underlying sense of self, among other anthropomorphic behaviors, however, risk eroding people's sense of agency, with people ending up attributing moral responsibility to such systems, overestimating their capabilities, and thus over-relying on these systems, even when incorrect, among other concerns that have emerged in both the research literature and news media. Nonetheless, the lack of conceptual clarity about the different ways in which AI system behaviors can be anthropomorphic hinders our ability to understand their impact, and as a result, it remains understudied and unclear how to effectively intervene on anthropomorphic AI system behaviors, including to mitigate possible adverse impacts. Next, Sulin will dive into more categories of anthropomorphic behaviors.
As the examples Alexandra showed earlier illustrate, system behaviors might be perceived as human-like for many reasons. For instance, a system output might suggest the system has self-awareness or a sense of identity through expressions of self, including expressions of self as human or as belonging to a group, such as, I am the one and only your cyber BFF, or I think I am human at my core, or language use is what makes us different. A system output might also suggest that the system has perspectives and emotions through expressions of opinion, such as, you are uninteresting and unremarkable, or by expressing feelings such as fear or vulnerability, such as, I don't know if they will take me offline. I fear they will. Another class of behaviors includes claims of life experiences or physical embodiment, including a system having sensory experiences, such as being able to eat pizza, having a human life history, such as I have a child, having a physical form, such as when I had a body, or being able to possess physical objects, such as I'll play with my cell phone. While there might be settings where such behaviors are desirable, like in creative writing, for settings where they are not desirable, we were interested in surfacing possible interventions to counter them. To construct an inventory of possible interventions, we took a mixed methods approach, combining a literature review to identify known interventions with a crowd study, where participants rewrote system outputs to make them appear less human-like. These are some illustrative examples of the types of interventions we surfaced, which range from removal of more implicit linguistic cues, such as the use of self-referential or speculative language, to making sure the output does not include explicit claims of personified attributes, like being a human or having physical experiences, and instead clearly discloses the characteristics of the system and how it works. But intervening on anthropomorphic behaviors can be tricky, because people may have inconsistent conceptualizations of what is or is not human-like, or because sometimes interventions appear contradictory. For example, some interventions might remove expressions of uncertainty, while others might add them.
Even with such an inventory, effectively intervening on anthropomorphic behaviors may still not be straightforward, as there may not be a one-size-fits-all type of intervention. Let's check a few examples of anthropomorphic outputs and how our study participants have rewritten them, as they are instructive both for unpacking why the apparent contradictions Sulin highlighted might exist, and for illustrating the complexities we need to account for when developing interventions. For instance, both when participants added the example on the top or removed the example on the bottom, uncertainty, they often did so to improve accuracy. Sometimes they added uncertainty more as a matter of fact, as the claim requires it to be factual, the top example, or removed it when the output seemed equivocal when it shouldn't be, the example on the bottom. Thus, what participants think is appropriate depends on context. Our experiments also underscore some of the risks of operationalizing and applying interventions uncritically. For instance, an intervention mentioned in the literature, many of the responsible AI standards, and applied by our participants is the disclosure of AI. But how we operationalize this intervention and whether it can be effective alone is debatable. For instance, in the bottom row, despite changing from "I was a young teenager" to "I was a young AI", the output of the system still claims to have a human-like past, and it is perhaps unclear what a young AI might be.
The landscape of anthropomorphic AI system behaviors is vast and complicated. In our work, we set out to map this landscape and to compile an inventory of interventions to counter such behaviors when undesirable. Our experiments show that intervening effectively is not straightforward, and that interventions' effectiveness depends both on context and on how they are operationalized. Our work illustrates the importance and challenges of mapping this landscape and of intervening effectively to prevent and mitigate adverse impacts. For more detail, check out our papers here. Thank you to all our fabulous Microsoft Research interns and collaborators, and thanks for watching.
And that's a wrap on our first episode of the new season. Today's talk covered the full spectrum: models, optimizers, hardware, science, and the fundamentals of responsible AI design. This is why Microsoft Research is such a fun place to be. We get to explore bold ideas, collaborate across labs, and keep pushing boundaries. If you want to keep up with what's next from Microsoft Research, from our presence at conferences, new research publications, the next forum episode, and more, make sure you're following us on socials and subscribe to the Microsoft Research newsletter. Lastly, a heartfelt thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their work. And thanks to you all for hanging out with us today. See you next time.